Hey everyone, Tim Raderstorff here, Chief Innovation Officer at the Ohio State University College of Nursing. It's Wellness Wednesday, so you see me dressed in my workout clothes, and I hope you're all taking time to do something for your mind, body, and soul today when you're done with engaging with this content. Couldn't be more excited today to begin our conversation with Zach Friedman, innovation strategist, and really I think you're going to be blown away by these 5 segments that we're going to do here with Zach. So make sure when you're done, if you end up going through all of them, that you are taking time to work on yourself too as part of a Wellness Wednesday, no matter what day of the week it is. But I'm going to open it up real quickly here to Zach to give us an introduction about himself, his experience with innovation, and how that's kind of led him to the career path that he's on today. So Zach, thanks so much for being here today, and looking forward to jumping in.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Hi, guys. My name is Zach Friedman. Currently work as an innovation strategist at a pharmaceutical marketing company, but have had a kind of a broad array of innovation. Started at Ohio State, started in marketing, and always been interested in innovation as a kid. Did a lot of research in consumer behavior, so really understanding like why people behave the way they do. What is it about them? How to use experiments to see the irrationalities that they have. And that got me really interested in understanding people, not only from a marketing perspective, but really from a human-centered perspective, how they act in context, how they do different things, and then how does that impact innovation. So when I was at Ohio State, I also was able to take courses in the design department, doing different methods and collective creativity, design workshops, and got really excited. So I actually made my own major in the business school at Ohio State, with both creativity, innovation, and consumer insights. That really allowed me.
At Ohio State too. So I did that at Ohio State. So I did humanistic medicine. It was supposed to be a pre-med major that had all the components of bedside healthcare and then the science behind it. And then decided I didn't want to be a physician. So it didn't work out for me as well as it worked out for you. But I'd love to hear more about it.
Well, no, I think it's really cool. Is in today's world, the most interesting things happen at the nexus, or the points of where disciplines intersect, right? Because that's where innovation happens, right? It happens at the edge. And what's cool about the edge is you don't necessarily have to be the foremost expert, because you might be the only person playing in that edge,
right?
And so those are where the new things crop up and big changes happen. And so I'm a big believer in edge and using edge to maximize those different things. So I did that at Ohio State. It was really fun. And then I joined a firm called Calypso, which was an innovation management consulting firm. So we did work in helping large companies not do the what of innovation, but the how. And so how do you put in the information systems, the strategy, the organizational design, and the pieces to make sure that products went to market better and faster.
And that's beautiful, because that's really what this MHI program is all about. It's not the what of innovation, it's the how of innovation and how to lead it. So I think there's going to be some awesome dialogue here.
Cool, yeah. So yeah, before I did that, I actually was able to take 8 months off in between. So I actually lived on an organic farm in Israel for 6 months. And that was really cool. It helped me get my hands dirty in sustainability, and grew a big beard, played in a lot of drum circles, and it was a really unique and neat experience to learn parts of life that you don't necessarily get to learn in your day in, day out, 9 to 5 kind of role. That was fun, and then I found out that the travel life wasn't always for me. So at Calypso, we traveled 4 to 5 days a week, always on client sites. So that was kind of tough. And so I ended up joining some of my really good friends at Launch Labs, and that was a startup kind of design, product development, entrepreneurial lab that we created to help different companies, both university technology, small startups, and larger companies do different work to discover opportunities, build and prototype products, and then launch different projects in the marketplace. Learned a lot there, was really great. But I found another role about a year ago, joined Inventive, and have been on the innovation team there. So our job at Inventive is to help our internal clients come up with new ideas, follow trends, and help large biopharma companies develop better experiences for patients, healthcare providers, and payers to accelerate their solutions in the marketplace. So it's been great. I've had a lot of different experiences, and it's cool to see in these different contexts how they all fit together.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that introduction, Zach. If you want to learn more about Zach, you're going to hear some really interesting topics today about trends, behavioral nudges, systems, and a little bit of Zen and innovation. So make sure you're making your way through these podcasts and finding some more information or more interesting conversations with Zach.
Thanks. Really excited to talk more about it, Tim.
Great. All right, everyone. Tim Raderstorff here, and we're moving into a new topic conversation with innovation strategist Zach Friedman. Excited to have Zach on today, and we're going to start today talking about systems. So, Zach, throughout this program, we look a little bit at complexity theory and systems, and want to get your thoughts and on how you've engaged in systems and what trends you've seen in the role of systems in impacting innovation and the leadership of innovation.
So there's one thing that I think if anyone can take away anything from this conversation, it's the idea that all organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they get.
Beautiful.
And that's an axiom. That is a truth that cannot be disproven. And you'll see that. And so one example, when I was at Calypso doing management consulting work, you find that people are investing all this money on helping teams, project teams that are making new products, be consumer-centric, have all these tools, have all this data, this new way of seeing customers, and they're investing all this money and stuff. And they have a new product development process. So most companies have what's called a stage gate process. So that's a series of phases and then gates that are decision criteria that help you kind of kill projects that aren't worth investing in, and make sure that you're doing the right stuff to increase the odds of success. One of the most challenging things was a lot of these companies, these projects are led by brand managers, and they sit in these global teams. But the career path for brand managers is such that they're incentivized every year to go on a new brand. These global projects last 2.5 years. And so HR had a policy that a system design to have people jump. So no matter what our client did, who's on the innovation side of all these new product development processes, all these new things, the teams weren't well led because there's so much turnover in the project manager. And so that's the idea that the design of the system caused the kind of results it was getting. So I found that really interesting is when you're looking at all the impacts you can have, make sure that you're understanding like what results the system is getting, because results are driven by the culture of the organization, kind of the work that people do, how their underlying values and belief systems, and the way the work actually gets done. That's kind of culture is driven by these kind of 6 design elements. And those design elements are the tasks that people do, the skills that people do to have those tasks, kind of how people report to each other, so what the structure looks like, the way people make decisions, the information and information systems they use to make decisions, and then finally, most importantly, how people are rewarded and recognized. So for example, project teams that will only reward and recognize for launching things on time, guess what happens? They just launch a lot of stuff really quickly through the process, and they're not necessarily making sure that it's right, because that's their reward and they're incentivized. And so that kind of dictates what your strategy is. And so you kind of think that way to diagnose the organization, and then you design going back. And so it's really critical to make sure you have that lens, that like systems-based lens when you're trying to solve a problem, because sometimes your new things won't stick. It won't stick to the culture. For example, those brand managers, all that learning on human-centered design or consumer centricity won't stick because they're just going place to place, and the HR process doesn't allow it to happen.
Excellent. So can you talk about systems that you've seen that are well designed and are getting the results that they're hoping for?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes into the idea of systems are inherently designed to maintain homeostasis, right? think of like an ecosystem, right? Like, because the longer an ecosystem happens, like a forest, it has all these things in place to keep it status quo. And what happens is, though, our world and our economy, the outside world changes. And so although this is why organizations have to innovate and have to change, because their performance engine has been created in a way to deal with the past, the future's changing and they can't keep up. So systems that I've seen work the best are ones that design that change into themselves. They have what we call the performance engine over here that has people like, paying today's bills, working on today's thing. But then if you want to create new innovation, sometimes depending on the way that's designed, you want to create a separate, what they call dedicated team to allow and understand how does this system work? What are these processes in place? What's the model that we need to use for the future to be successful? And then that dedicated team, once that gets momentum, can go back and change the way of the design of the performance engine to better meet that future. But you have to have those forefront and frontiers kind of going off and understanding what's out there. Because if you don't, you're not going to necessarily know what that future is and what your organization needs to help and do. So that what you're learning in this program on, customer discovery processes, prototyping, understanding systems, designing those things, and being that innovator in the front end, tying those skill sets with an organizational design skill set to go back and say, how do we affect the performance engine to make them more effective, is a really helpful way to think about that.
Yeah, and when we first talked, I apologize if this is going to throw you off for some discussion downstream, but we talked about the concept of trophic cascades, and that's actually built into one of our courses, best practices in organizational operations. So can you talk a little bit about the systems and how trophic cascades, or maybe explain trophic cascades and then how that may impact a system?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that one of the best ways to learn about systems is to study nature, to understand and get your hands dirty in the idea of how ecosystems work. Like I said in the intro, I spent 6 months in Israel on an organic farm, and we learned permaculture, which permaculture is a design discipline of sustainable ecosystems. And so the whole idea of a permaculture is their best tool is their hammock, because they sit and observe and they make minimal changes to the ecosystem and environment to create maximum impact. Trophic cascades is this really interesting concept where we're finding the role of keystone species, especially predators, in different environments, changes the behavior of an environment in a way that, although they're such a small group, they can have a massive impact. A really good YouTube example of wolves and how they changed the rivers at Yellowstone National Park. And so the coolest thing is the wolves, there was an overpopulation of deer, so they were eating all the different things in the valley, and it was really causing degradation of the plant ecosystem. When wolves came in, they attacked the deer and hunted the deer. Yes, they killed off the deer, but that wasn't the most important part. What they did is they fundamentally changed the behavior of how these deer operated. So they were scared in the sense of they stopped hanging out in the valleys. They would go, their heads were on swivel, they're looking around, making sure they're not going to get eaten by wolf. And then that behavior allowed the regeneration of the wetlands, allowed new ecosystems to grow, allowed new plants to reinforce riverbanks and straighten the rivers, which created ecosystem niches for beavers and all these different things. And so by adding those kind of predatorial people, the wolves, if you will, in the ecosystem, you can change the behavior of everyone else. And that's actually kind of somewhat true of these dedicated teams in the performance engine, in that by seeing the outside world, by going off and prototyping and experimenting and bringing that back, you create a culture of innovation. You create this belief system that we're here to change. And the people in the performance engine, if they see what's happening and understand, they might stay out of the valleys of doing the same thing every time. They might get more excited about what's possible, career path themselves into a different possibility, and understand that innovation is a part of the thing. and the way things are happening. So that dedicated team can act like wolves do in the ecosystem, and there's somewhat of a trophic cascade that happens. And that's really critical for innovation. So it's not only about the what of what you do, it's the culture of changing behavior and how things kind of flow from there.
Great. So you're listening to innovation strategist Zach Friedman talk about how systems impact innovation. And we're doing this on a Wellness Wednesday today, as you can see by my attire. So hopefully you're all taking time to get out and engage in some wellness activities after this podcast. Hi, everyone. Tim Raderstorff here, Chief Innovation Officer at The Ohio State University, and super excited to be talking today with Zach Friedman, Innovation Strategist, on a variety of different topics. We're doing this on a Wellness Wednesday, as you can see, so hope you're taking some time for yourself to get out there and engage in some wellness activities. If you haven't heard Zach's talk on systems theory yet, I encourage you to go to the library and take a look at that. But today we're talking about a variety of things, and the next topic we're going to talk about is trends. So I want to engage Zach here, and particularly from a marketing standpoint, and then also understanding, as you look for opportunity as a leader of healthcare innovation, how you can look to trends and really engage in what direction you need to be going next. So, Zach, let's jump in here and talk about what trends are and why they're important and how they influence others.
Thanks, Tim. When I like to talk about this, I like to start with there's a really cool podcast called Invisibilia. And Invisibilia is all about the invisible things that affect people's behavior and change their behavior. And their season 3 kicked off recently, and the first series of episodes they had is on emotions. And it was really interesting. They came in and talked about, we have this concept that emotions are things that are inherent in all of us, that fear and response to stress and negativity and all those different innate emotions we have, we think that those are things that we just respond to. That's actually not true. A lot of new research has found that the body has 4 basic emotions that you feel internally: pleasantness, unpleasantness, relief or relaxation, and stimulation. And in your mind, the culture that you learn or ideas that you learn, they're called concepts, are what actually take those base level emotions that your body is feeling inside and transfer them into what we know as fear, love, anxiety, depression, excitement, passion. Those are all learned concepts. And the idea is the experiences we have in the world are what dictate how we see the world and ultimately how we have those experiences in our own mind. So when I'm a young boy and I have a negative experience and my mom says, well, what should I feel here? Oh, should I feel fear? So I learned that unpleasantness, because I'm hurt or have a negative experience, all of a sudden I associate that with fear. So this idea that concepts are reinforcing experiences we have, and then we see the world through those things. That's not only in emotions, though. That's in everything we do. So the experiences that we have essentially then dictate how we see the world. So for example, when someone is blind when they're younger and they have a cataract surgery or something to see in the future, they actually don't immediately see the world in the way we do. They don't see objects and different pieces and movement. They see a blur of light. And it's only over time, as their brain learns the concept of what objects are, that they actually see the different things in the different ways. And that's true for things like snow and language. So for example, Eskimos have over 40 words for snow. And so their ability to see and experience the concepts of different types of snow completely changes the way they experience that snow. So their experiences and culture then dictate how we see the world. So to me, that's what's really powerful about the idea of trends. And so trends are emerging phenomenon that are changing people's expectations. So for example, we have one that we follow called immediate is the new fast. And what's happening today is, 2-day shipping is very much yesterday. Everyone wants things now. So with Amazon Prime Now, Uber Eats, Postmates, and all these experiences, I can have almost anything at the tip of my fingers available anytime I want. And every time I, as a consumer or anyone has that experience, it develops an expectation saying, wow, I can have anything anytime I want immediately. And that doesn't just affect those eating out or buying products, it also affects healthcare. And so now that I'm a consumer and now I'm playing the role as patient and I have a prior authorization I need for a new drug, and it takes me 2 weeks and I have to fill out faxes and it's not immediate, I have a bad experience. Even if that's an improvement in every other prior authorization process that's out there, doesn't matter. I'm holding that expectation that I've developed from those experiences to a new standard elsewhere in my life. And so that's the power of trends. Trends point to those new expectations customers have, consumers have, health providers have, everyone has based on these new things that are happening. And they say, hey, how do we use those as opportunities for innovation to make sure that we're delivering on those expectations in order to either delight people or not make them really angry?
Right. And I can think back to years ago when I started in undergrad and talking about being a physician, and one of my uncles going off about the healthcare world and its lack of, he was an entrepreneur and focused a lot on customer engagement, and would always, note that when he went, to non-healthcare places and there was a wait, he was immediately told how long it was going to be, and they'd offer him a cup of coffee and engage him in conversation, and just talked about, how depersonalized that looks from when you go to your physician's office and there's a wait, but they're not going to tell you how long it's going to be. They're not going to offer you coffee, and they're not going to come out and have a conversation with you and try and build that personal relationship that builds upon customer satisfaction. And then, more satisfied customers, that we should be studying this data of, if it's a more satisfied customer, do they have better outcomes? So really looking at where we can find those trends within healthcare and finding new opportunities, because that relationship standpoint, I think, is something that's totally lost in healthcare right now, along with the immediacy. I love that trend that immediate is the new fast. Are you seeing any other major trends right now from the corporate world that are pretty directly applicable to healthcare?
Absolutely, yeah. So, at my role in Inventive, we release annual trend reports. So right now we're following 56 across digital, consumer, communications, and healthcare. And so we help different brands understand what those trends are and how those trends should help them point to new ideas. Let's see what another one that I think is a good one to talk through. I think one we like a lot is called lumps and bumps. And this is the idea of, the hashtag no filter movement, right? And, we saw that in 2016, that was arising, and in 2017, it's a really big trend, is that both consumers and brands are no longer, it's kind of the backlash of filters and perfect selves that are being displayed on social media platforms, that people want the raw, honest, integrity experience. So you're seeing, brands like Depends talk about what it's really like to have adult incontinence and what daily life is like that. So it's not just like, oh, I'm great and here's how that. No, it's like, no, this really sucks, and you have to, here's a product and here's what it is in real life. Or there's really some examples of like motherhood and parenting, and brands talking about what it's really like to be a mother, or what it's really like to have a certain disease. And I think consumers are really talking about that. You're seeing patient advocates and people online. I saw an example of, how to have a intercourse or relationships with an ostomy bag. I saw a leader say, in the space, we did some research for a client, and they had, 10,000 word blog on the details, tricks, tips, advice about what it's like and how to talk about that. And people having candid conversations about the challenges of being a patient. And brands that don't have that now are looking like inauthentic or not genuine,
right.
because they're not being there for them. They're not telling you what it's really like.
Excellent. Well, again, this is Zach Friedman and Tim Raderstorff here talking about trends from industry into healthcare, and I hope you're being able to take some great lessons here, because Zach is able to quickly make these connections from the industry world into health. that's really what we want you to be doing throughout this program, is finding what's happening within healthcare, but also looking outside and recognizing that industry tends to be further along than most healthcare organizations. And that's a great opportunity for us as leaders of innovation in healthcare to identify what's working well and incorporate those back in. So thanks to Zach for this great conversation on trends today.
Thanks, Tim.
Hi, everyone. Tim Radersdorf here, and have the honor of continuing our conversation with Zach Friedman, an innovation strategist. And we've hit on a couple great topics today on this Wellness Wednesday. I hope you all are taking some time to take care of yourselves, regardless of the day of the week, and doing some wellness activities. But Zach and I have discussed a little bit on systems and systems theory and behavior, or in trends so far. And you may not have had the opportunity to read that depending on where you're at in the program, or listen to those. So I hope you find time to listen to all of Zach's conversations. But one that I'm really excited to dive into now is behavioral nudges, and how that may impact us as providers, as patients, and consumers. So talk to us, Zach, a little bit about what we mean by behavioral nudges and how you see that being implemented in industry and healthcare today.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think there's a really good book that got me into the whole idea of consumer behavior and behavioral nudges. It's called Predictably Irrational. It's by Dan Ariely, and the whole thesis of the book is the idea that, as people, we assume that people are rational thinkers, that they make the best decisions for themselves, they optimize their environment and make decisions against things in the most rational way. That's not necessarily true. Behavioral experiments have shown that people are very irrational. They change what they do all the time. And the thing that is good is that it's predictably so. And he uses the metaphor of optical illusions, and that we can trick our brains through seeing things that don't exist that are there. Same thing happens in our brains when we make decisions. There's decision illusions that occur. And so behavioral nudges is the whole idea of understanding those tips and tricks to put those illusions in place and putting those within a healthcare system to help physicians, help patients really shift their behavior in a way so we're making them make the right decisions, that they're adherent to the medication, that they're taking the stairs versus the elevator, that they're dieting in a meaningful way, that they're creating the habits in a space that allows them to be productive and more healthy, rather than having to say and invest tons of money on medications, on treatment for people that are just going to get sicker, unhealthier, because they're not making the right decisions based on what's best for them.
Excellent. So how you mentioned this concept of baking behavioral nudges into the decision-making criteria. Where do you see that occurring within healthcare or within industry?
Yeah, there's some really good examples of that happening. One study I really like to quote is they did a study, this was released in like 2016, where they wanted to get physicians to prescribe less antibiotics that weren't needed. So they had a lot of different conditions. In the EHR platform, as they were prescribing, they had different things pop up when they were having physicians prescribe antibiotic. One group, they just had something pop up and told them about the dangers of overprescribing antibiotics. Another group, they had them write in the rationale about why they were prescribing the antibiotic into the system. The next group, they told them the prescribing rates of other physicians in their practice and what level that was taking place. Really interesting. So first group didn't have that large of an effect on prescribing behavior. And the next two groups significantly so. And so what we find is that the tool of forcing people to have a rationalization of the decision on why they're making it helps them question and reanalyze it. Also, peer influence is a huge driver of getting people to change their behavior. So you probably have seen this when you're in a hotel, is there's a little card that says 86% of other people that were in this room hung up the towels and didn't reuse them. Instead of just telling you that reuse the towels is better for the environment, they almost trick you into saying, like, are you the best, 14% of people that actually hangs up the towels? So these little tiny tricks and things you can do to cause people to, scientifically we know, change the way they behave in a meaningful way. There's another example called Wealth. It's a startup that is helping people be adherent. So for example, they use what's called loss aversion. So when someone is discharged with a cardiac event and they need to take a lot of new medication to make sure that they're being adherent and prevent that event from happening, those pills are really critical, and the medication and monitoring is really critical for them to do. So I think they get like $200 when they leave the hospital, and then every day they don't take their medication, they lose 2 of those dollars. And so instead of just like telling people they need to or giving them money to do things, science shows that people will work harder to not lose money than they will to actually get money in the first place. So that's a partnership they're doing with payers to make sure that patients have these opportunities to engage with and have a toolkit and a program that allows them to maintain adherence. So all sorts of interesting tactics are in place with patient adherence, with getting physicians to make better decisions, and kind of nudging people along in the path. I know that the UK government has a whole behavioral insights team that produces a lot of really good publications that we'll provide the link to. And the University of Pennsylvania has I forget the name of the program, the Center for Health Incentives and Behavioral Economics, that releases all sorts of content and examples. And I really hope that you look into that and maybe use those when you're doing different programs or baking in different startup opportunities or innovation opportunities to say, how do we use the science of decision making to better make people do their wellness decisions in a meaningful way? Because it is Wellness Wednesday after all, and we should all incorporate science to make those decisions easier for everyone.
And I hope all of our listeners right now are really thinking about the behavioral nudges that impact them on a daily basis, whether you're an executive in a health system right now, and the things that you use either to incentivize yourself or incentivize your staff, whether you're a bedside practitioner or working in a startup, all these are opportunity. So really think about how Zach's viewpoint here on utilizing science to impact behavior and what we can do to collectively improve the health and wellness of our communities. So I want to thank Zach for the great concept of behavioral nudges, and look forward to see your all's feedback on this and how you can incorporate it into your own practice. All right, everyone, Tim Raderstorff here, and we are speaking today with innovation strategist Zach Friedman on a beautiful Wellness Wednesday. So I hope you're all taking some time today to get out and find some way to make yourself happier, healthier, or engage with some type of physical or emotional activity today. Zach and I have been having a conversation. This is actually part 5 of the conversation, but I hope that you're hearing it spread throughout the program of these great lessons that we can take from industry and bring them into healthcare. We've talked about trends and systems theory and behavior and culture and a lot of different things here, but one key component, particularly on a Wellness Wednesday, that I think is going to be very interesting for us to talk about next is Zen and innovation. And Zach's had some really interesting life experiences upon meditation and innovation and finding that inner peace. So Zach, why don't you tell us a little bit about how wellness and innovation have played a role in your journey?
Thanks, Tim. Well, I will put one caveat is these are experiences I've had, but I am no guru in this space. I just have learned a couple of different things, and I find they call mindfulness a practice. And the reason it's a practice versus something you obtain is you have to do it all the time. You have to practice it. So if you don't practice it, it's not a practice. And so it's something that you need to do, to learn, to experience, and it's just kind of always something to get better at and do. So I encourage everyone to explore and find whatever practice makes most sense for them. But for me, after I left my role in consulting, actually my last day of my role was my 25th birthday. So I actually called it my quarter life crisis, if you will. And I did a couple months of adventure and doing some interesting things after that. One of which a friend of mine actually dared me to do a 10-day silent meditation retreat. She didn't think I could be quiet for 10 days, and thought it was a really good opportunity. She was a big fan of it. That was kind of the high level dare in disguise, saying, "Oh, I dare you to be quiet for 10 days. It would be an interesting experience." That wasn't actually the hard part, though, believe it or not. And so it was called Vipassana meditation. And the whole idea of Vipassana meditation is there's no visualizations, there's no verbalizations, and you kind of just sit there. And you sit there and you observe the body. The first thing you do over the first couple days is you just breathe and you observe the in and out. And as you observe that in and out, you slowly calm the mind. And then from there, you focus kind of on the upper lip and just the experience of what that's like. Then you start on your head, and then you do the whole body scan of just checking in and seeing what it feels like. That was about for 12 to 14 hours a day, just sitting there, doing it in silence. And what's interesting about the concept is, you know, a lot of us have heard this, is the idea that like suffering in Buddhism is all attributed to the idea that everything is temporary, that we will pass away, everything will pass away. We're waves on a long journey of, you know, things emerging and passing away. And suffering comes when we forget that, because when we have cravings, or we desire something, or we're really averse to something happening, those cravings and aversions are attachments to things that eventually will fall away. And so that's what causes suffering, because there's no reason to crave something that will eventually not be there, or be really scared of something that eventually will stop happening, because there's no permanence. And so that's really easy somewhat to understand conceptually, right? But it doesn't really, you don't really get something when you just get it conceptually. And so when you sit there and you observe the body, you start getting this really weird tingling sensation, actually. It's very strange. And it's kind of like your foot being asleep, but like all over your body. And you're like having this, this thing. And the idea of it is you essentially have these knots in your body that emerge from those cravings and aversions. It like is a physical manifestation. You know, when you're stressed and you have kind of like a knot in your back, those over time are kind of those attachments. And so when you're not creating any new ones, the old ones kind of bubble up at the surface. And so you're sitting there and you're like having this like thing, and you're like, oh, I have a knot in my back. What is that? And you kind of like hang out and you just observe it, and it kind of goes away. And it's slowly teaching you to let go of these things, let go of these cravings. And so for me, as I was doing this, you know, you can't write, you can't speak, so your mind's just going crazy every time you're not meditating. And there's this whole idea of that's a really good model and training for innovation and human-centered design, because truly designing for someone and designing them is to see them as they are, like see the world as they are, the person as they are, not as you wish them to be, craving, or not as you don't wish them to be, right? Aversion. You're having attachments to your own ideas, your own perceptions, your own value systems that you project onto others. And that's why innovation doesn't work. That's why human-centered design is so critical, is that you don't want to project your value system on someone or your ideas, what you think. You want to see them as they are. And so by practicing meditation, by practicing non-attachment, by practicing mindfulness, you're really able to meet the person where they are, where their needs are, what they really want, what they desire. And you can create things in that way and be a Zen-based innovator, if you will, to help really make things more impactful and ultimately like help people relieve their suffering through the offerings that you give them. And
that's fascinating. I think, you know, going with the mission of our college, it really correlates to our desire to live well. And so can you maybe go a little more concrete on that and talk about how you've been able to utilize that Zen component when you innovate, or maybe even, we hit on user-centered design quite a bit, but we haven't really explained it. So in case this comes at a point in someone's education where we haven't gone into that, can you dive into a little bit about user-centered design and then how Zen can help with that?
Yeah. So the idea of you want to start with the human and start with empathy for people. And so really understand, it's not any product, anything that you're making, any service is not about the thing. It's about the person and their experience with that thing. And human-centered design is the idea, and design thinking is that you design for people. You design for their needs, their emotions, their wants, and desires. A great example is there was an executive who was designing a lot of, I believe they were, it's escaping me right now, ultrasound machines where you get in the large tube and you have the
MRIs.
MRI, sorry. Wow, MRIs. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm totally my head hasn't been there for a second. So MRI machines, and he had to implement them in children's hospitals, and he was really excited. They made this really great machine. It was breakthrough. The technology was awesome, and he saw a child walking towards that machine, and they were crying. They were terrified because the experience that they had in that MRI machine was in this big tube that had to be still, and it was really scary, and they had to sit there, and he just, his heart broke. See, he discovered that he had designed these terrifying machines that kids were scared of. And so he said, no longer, I'm going to change. I'm going to do this whole thing differently. And so they implemented an entire themed ride, if you will, where one was pirate ship themed, where they had the check-in process, and it was all about like staying still and make sure the pirates don't get you. And it was all a game to make the MRI experience amazing. And kids loved it. They wanted to keep going. They wanted to keep going. And so it was designing for the human, not just the medical procedure, but who's a human that's going to have that procedure. And we'll include a link to those videos. There's some great case studies in that that talks about human-centered design. But if you're not Zen and you're not meeting the kid where they are, you're projecting your ideas of, oh, it has to have this sleek design, and here's the medical procedure, and things have to happen, and here's why it's important, and it's an important procedure, and we have to keep it very serious because that's what it is. And if you have that as an attachment, that's going to cause you suffering because there's a dichotomy there that's going to cause tension, and that kids don't think that way. That's not their belief system. That's not their values. And you have to meet them where they are, see them as they are, and don't have an aversion to play, and don't have an attachment to seriousness, and just be there. And a way to practice that, again, it's a practice, is to talk to people, empathize with them, see them where they are. Don't project onto them, and have the opportunity to just be there for them and understand what things are important to them.
Excellent. So that's a pretty inspirational viewpoint on how we can use mindfulness and wellness and incorporate that into being innovative and being leaders within our systems, within our organizations. So, Zach, thanks so much for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, no problem.
So that's 5. How are you on time? Are you able to go off script a little bit here?
I can. Yeah. What do you want to talk about? How were those? Sometimes I forget the example because I haven't talked about it in a second. But
no, I thought you nailed them all. It was great.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, and I can send like follow-up links.
Yeah. I've highlighted a couple of things that I want to get show notes for, so I can get those to you. We can call it if you need to get into work here, or we can hit on something else if there's something of interest.
What do you one more? What would you want to do? That's one more.
So I'm trying to look through here. What's your viewpoint on disruptive innovation or positive deviance? I'd like to get multiple viewpoints on that. So I don't know if you have a passion about either of those.
On how to do disruptive, or what is disruptive?
What is, how to do it, and whether or not healthcare is a disruptive innovation space, or it's a place where I have a viewpoint that healthcare isn't. Everyone's been saying healthcare innovation is ripe for disruption for the last 25 years. Well, eventually, when something's ripe, it then turns sour. So I think right now the opportunity exists, but the system that's in place, as we go back to systems theory, isn't set up for disruption. It's set up for incremental changes. And even when disruptive technologies come in, it's the too early game. And we continue to run into this over and over again, that people have these ideas and things that could dramatically impact healthcare, but instead the system isn't set up to allow them to be successful, and no one's big enough to disrupt healthcare as a system.
That's true, but that's not how disruption happens.
Right.
Right. It happens for like underserved or unused customers.
Mm-hmm.
So you teach Clayton Christensen theory?
I wasn't design or part of that course, but yeah, that's who it's brought on, or that's
yeah. So his whole thing is, if you look at the example of let's just talk now, because apparently like there's like sirens happening, which is horrible.
It's noon on a Wednesday.
Yep. It's the first Wednesday in the month, so they're going crazy. Yeah, I can talk about the idea of like what is disruption, and like how to think about it, and like how to look for spaces. Maybe we can tie the idea of monopolies by Peter Thiel.
Okay.
So Peter Thiel has this really good idea of like why monopolies, and like for example, why eBay, like how PayPal became a monopoly, how Google became a monopoly, how Amazon became a monopoly, and that they found a place they can monopolize and go outside of the center. And that's kind of how disruption innovation happens. Is you can't, if you aim to, oh yeah, I got a great one.
Awesome.
One. Yep. I got a whole thing. I'm going to bring in some Joseph Campbell in here as well.
Awesome. Okay. Perfect. Well, we'll jump in here then. All right, everyone. Oh, we'll start again.
Yeah, sorry. I got to
shake it out. Yep. Hi, everyone. Tim Raderstorff here with innovation strategist Zach Friedman, and been having probably some of my most exciting conversations so far in this podcast recording session. And we're doing it on a Wellness Wednesday too. So if you didn't get the chance to go back and listen to Zen and innovation and mindfulness, I think that could be perhaps your engagement with an innovation activity or a meditation or mindfulness wellness activity today, regardless of whether it's a Wednesday or whatever day it is. And it's a really interesting conversation where we were able to combine those two passions. So hopefully you find that to be as intriguing as we did. But we're going to pivot a little bit here now and talk about disruptive innovation, and not just disruptive innovation, but also monopolies and some of the large companies that we integrate with on a daily basis, and see how disruption is utilized by those organizations, and then where that allows opportunity for innovation and growth. So Zach, talk to us a little bit about your viewpoints on disruptive innovation and monopolies as well.
Yeah, and so to start, I think when you aim at disruption, I think you're really holding yourself to an. Can we actually restart? Because they're like, did you hear that? Like they're.
No worries. Yeah, we can restart.
We can. Sorry, I just.
Yeah. Not a problem at all.
They're still going at it.
You want me to wait? Tell me when you're ready. I don't hear anything in the background, but you tell me when you're ready so it's not distracting you.
Oh, you just hear that in the background? Sorry, they were like, everybody has your.
Oh, yeah. This is a test of the system or whatever.
Yeah, they're yelling at me.
Perfect.
All
okay.
Right, now we're good. Let's go.
All right.
Oh, hold on. Sorry, they're doing it again. Can you hear that, though?
I can't hear it. So as long as it's not disruptive to you, then we can get going. But you let me know.
No, it's not disruptive to me. I just thought that it was like a loud thing. And
no, it's not coming through on our end. So
cool. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Tim Raderstorff here, and I'm speaking with innovation strategist Zach Friedman. We've had a lot of great conversations today. You can see that we're in our Wellness Wednesday activity. So if you get a chance and haven't engaged in a Wellness Wednesday activity or just a wellness activity today, go back and listen to our podcast on Zen and innovation. Hopefully that'll give you a little bit of inspiration on how you can engage this passion that you have for innovation and our goals here to live well in the College of Nursing. But we're going to pivot a little bit here and now talk about disruptive innovation and monopolies, and how those two maybe play with each other and identify opportunities for not only disruption but growth or opportunities maybe to lead innovation within a system. So Zach, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think disruption is hard. It's kind of a misnomer. Most people that aim to disrupt didn't intentionally always go for disruption. Actually, if you go for disruption from the get-go, you usually fail because you never really gain traction. And that reminds me, Joseph Campbell is one of my favorite authors. He writes a lot about the hero's journey, and myth and mythology across a lot of cultures. And one of the poems he has, I really like this quote. If you're trying to change the world, you're barking up the wrong tree. The world is perfect. It's a mess. It will always be a mess. Our job is to straighten out our own lives. And the whole idea that heroes that become in myths and mythology, they don't start trying to become heroes. They are heroed upon. They leave home to straighten out their own life, and they find their Hakuna Matata, if you will. Right? The Lion King, they leave home, they find Timon and Pumbaa, and it's, yeah, Hakuna Matata. And they bring it back to the kingdom. And when they bring that back to the kingdom and they integrate it and they disrupt the kingdom, that's where disruption happens. And so think of yourself as a disruptor. A great metaphor is the hero's journey. And if you're going towards, think about like systems, a conversation back on systems, right? If you're trying to change a system, right? You have to go into the organization, you have to change the culture, and you have to battle against it, right? And you're fighting and you're trying to change, you're trying to adopt to it, and all of a sudden you just get exhausted and tired out. But if you become what I call the youest you, right? The youest you that could possibly you, that most essence of you, and you're not trying to change others, you're trying to be yourself, you kind of become a catalyst. And that a catalyst is a unique shape, unique structure that when it comes in contact with other molecules, it changes them. But not by trying to change them, just by coming in contact. And to me, that's the idea of disruption, is by being the youest you, by being the change, by finding the area where you can disrupt, you can actually have that long-term impact that if you went for disruption off the get-go, it wouldn't work. Now more tangibly, if we go into industry and we look at this, Peter Thiel has a lot of really good examples of the idea of build a monopoly. Find places where you can monopolize to disrupt. So let's go to Amazon to start. Jeff Bezos knew that he wanted to sell everything and really change the market in a really big way. But where did he start? He didn't start selling everything. He started with books. He said, I can win the book industry. I can disrupt the book industry. And so he really focused on books and got that really strong hold on books. They built the shipping infrastructure. They built the different pieces, right? They built the brand name and the recognition. And then from there, started monopolizing other avenues and grew bigger and bigger and bigger. Right? Google did the same thing. They did it with search, right? The idea that in order to grow is to have these small monopolies and grow from center of strength. And so Clayton Christensen is a really good scholar on disruptive innovation. He's great guy, has a lot of books written about it. And essentially the whole idea is incremental innovation, you're on an improvement curve like this. And so every product gets better and better and better. Disruptive innovation starts down here in a place where the product isn't nearly as good as the competitive product. And it's usually for customers that don't have access to this product or are overserved. But the growth trajectory is here. So as that goes over time, all of a sudden there's an inflection point that flips it and it disrupts the incumbent. So for example, let's think of refrigeration technology as a great example of disruption innovation. Ice boxes were the norm for years. And ice boxes, people would take ice from the Great Lakes to the Arctic. They would saw it into blocks and then ship the ice down and then put them in ice boxes. People would have fridges. And so incremental innovation there was cutting the ice better logistics, better boxes. But there are places in the world where that wasn't realizable. You couldn't have that. So they created fridges and refrigeration technology and freezers that were really expensive, didn't work as well, required a lot of electricity, and were really hard. So there was only a small subset of customers that'd be willing to pay for it. But over time, that got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper and disrupted the whole logistics of the icebox industry. That's how you got to think about disruption, is finding where in healthcare that there's a need, there's an opportunity, there's an unserved market. The system hasn't touched this small area. And you can create that opportunity. You can build your technology. You get those first customers. You can monopolize that market for that subset of people. And then improve on the technology or the business model or whatever is the critical factor that's preventing you from scaling it. And then overtake the incumbent by using the Hakuna Matata, by using your hero's journey, by using all the momentum you gained outside, and then bringing it back to the main system, that you've been able to do that. I think that's really a way to think about disruption, and a way to, if you want to be a disruptor, it's very much a personal endeavor. It's a journey, and you don't know necessarily what the answer is. And you have to kind of trust that you'll find your guru, you'll find your Simone and Pumbaa. They will show you the way, and eventually you'll bring it back to the kingdom and have the disruption.
Excellent. Well, that's Zach Friedman talking on disruptive innovation and monopolies. And I hope that you're able to draw a lot of correlations to where that may be directly applicable to your work, whether that be in a startup or within a healthcare system, or whatever way you are looking to impact healthcare.
Very cool. Thanks, guys.
And let's we'll thank Zach today. This is going to be this last recording that we've done with him. Zach, love spending time with you today, and really appreciate you volunteering your time to help improve healthcare at Columbus and beyond. So thanks so much for your time today, Zach.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.